When one reporter mocked Barron Trump at a charity gala, no one expected him to retaliate in such a manner and steal the show. The ballroom of the Fairmont Grand Hotel was breathtaking, a shimmering spectacle of glamour, where chandeliers rained crystal pieces of light in the midst of a sea of dignitaries. The air was thick with scholarly small talk, a soft hum weaving through the high annual charity fundraiser gala. It was not an ordinary night. Among the attendees were some of the richest and most powerful individuals in the nation, corporate titans, movie stars and top reporters, there for a night out for a good reason, a fundraiser for a charity that supports underprivileged children. But despite the excesses and sense of mission of the evening, there hung an undertone of anticipation. Something was on the verge of shifting. Barron Trump sat quietly in the back of the room, buried in an inconspicuous corner. Only 18 years old, his height and dignified demeanor drew eyes involuntarily, though unintentionally. A guest of a friend of the family, he was not there to take center stage. Rather, he watched. His piercing blue gaze swept over the room in soft focus, his expression serene, inscrutable. The evening went along smoothly. Waiters glided through the groups, handing out delectable hors d'oeuvres and fizzy champagne as a string quartet played soothing melodies. Warmth filled the conversation, and there was laughter at ease. Everything seemed set for just another lovely evening. But then, everything changed. A reporter, who was infamous for his biting words and inflammatory jokes, stepped out onto the platform. What was to come no one anticipated. The moment everyone was waiting for, the actual main event for the evening, was about to begin. The keynote speech, a presentation that had been eagerly awaited for weeks. The speaker, a prominent journalist, a polarizing personality within liberal media communities, famous for their sharp tongue and tongue-in-cheek remarks. Some admired their forthright style of speech, while others regarded them as a firebrand who thrived on conflict. Tonight, they had promised to give a speech that would rock perceptions and stimulate debate. But as the master of ceremonies walked toward them to introduce them, a small tremor passed through the hall. Voices were lowered, glasses put down with care. Everyone's attention turned toward the podium. Even Barron Trump, who had been a distant observer for most of the evening, eased a bit in his chair, his expression unreadable. And then, under the glare of stage lights, the reporter appeared. Her bright smile, the assured way she stepped forward, the sharp black suit. She had the presence of someone who knew how to command a room. A courteous scattering of applause, but beneath it was a shared anticipation. Would they shake things up tonight? Would they say something that left the crowd buzzing? No one knew where they would go with it. The address started in a slick, energetic and captivating manner. The journalist broke the ice in the room with affable humor, joking about the city's cruel traffic, and even recalling an earlier gala debacle where a doomed champagne structure had come tumbling down. The audience giggled, tension disappeared, and for a moment it was like any other celebrity event, sophisticated, routine, and well-organized. But then the tone shifted. It started out as mocking commentary, but soon snuck into something biting. The reporter moved from discussing culture and politics to making overt jabs at celebrities. Some in the crowd laughed along in agreement, savoring the biting sarcasm. Others exchanged glances, sensing the tone was shifting. The speech was about to turn in a direction that no one in the room would ever forget, a joke that went too far. As the reporter continued, the atmosphere in the ballroom began to shift. The guests laughed at some of what he said, but others glanced at one another uneasily, their grins tightening. And then, inevitably, the spotlight fell squarely on Donald Trump. Well, we can't talk about the state of the world without mentioning the man who turned orange into the new black, the reporter quipped. There was some laughter in the crowd. Love him or hate him, you have to admit, he's the gift that keeps on giving for people like me. Some outright laughed at the old, familiar brand of barbed humor. Others grew uncomfortable in their seats, acutely aware of the thin line between satire and flat-out disdain. At Barron Trump's table there was silence, stillness, his face unchanging. Had the reporter happened to glance, they showed no indication, at least not as yet. The bullets just kept firing. Trump's policies, his tweets, even his appearances in public life, all became fodder for the journalist's stock and trade. But now there was something new. The easy laughter that once rolled out of control now dwindled away, leaving behind a tension that hung in the air. A growing restlessness began to creep over the audience, and then the journalist crossed a line. "And of course," they continued, with a theatrical pause, "we can't leave his most underappreciated legacy, his next generation. I mean, let's talk about Barron." There was a collective gasp of shock that rippled through the room. Eyes locked, eyes on Barron, who did not blink as the weight of the moment settled upon him. The reporter's tone remained carefree, even playful, but there was no mistaking the sting in their words. "Imagine growing up in a golden tower, marble everything, while your dad is busy tweeting world leaders. Meanwhile, the rest of us are just struggling to make it through Monday mornings. That must have been character building, right?" This joke did not get a laugh this time. A few snickers circulated nervously through the ballroom. But beyond that, the rest of the crowd sat like statues, the joke lost in the sheer audacity of the remark. The moment was unwelcome, unbidden, and everyone was staring at Barron. But instead of bristling with rage, discomfort, or even a little embarrassment, Barron did something no one expected. The moment that left the entire room. Reeling for an instant, it seemed as though the room itself took a breath. Everyone's eyes were on Barron Trump, a young man thrust into the spotlight suddenly without even a warning. The journalist's words still hung in the air, cold and heavy, ready to drop. But Barron didn't flinch. He did not shift in his chair. He did not glance about the room for comfort. He did not even blink. Rather, he sat rigidly motionless, his face impassive, his hands lightly resting on the table's edge. The longer the silence, the more it seemed to scream. There were some uneasy looks exchanged between guests. The laughter that had once permeated the ballroom was missing, replaced by an unshakable tension. Even the reporter, so confident a moment earlier, could sense it. Their smirk faltered ever so slightly as their eyes flashed across to Barron's table. Maybe they had been expecting a chuckle, a forced smile, or even an indifferent shrug. Anything but this. But the stillness of Barron was not passive. It was not a function of awkwardness or uncertainty. It was calculated. In that moment, his presence, a quiet but commanding one, seemed to balloon. The same crowd that had moments earlier laughed and joked now sat silent, as if instantly understanding as a whole the weight of what had been spoken. It was not silence, it was a response. It said, "I hear you, I see you, and I am not moved." A soft whisper pierced the tension as a friend whispered to their friend near the stage. The reporter, sensing now more obviously the shift in mood, cleared his throat in an attempt to regain control. "Tough crowd," he muttered into the microphone, attempting to laugh. But no one laughed with him. The atmosphere was thick, the weight of the moment weighing upon everyone in the room. And then Barron moved. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed back his chair. The soft scraping of the chair legs on the floor echoed louder than any words ever could. Something was going to happen, and no one in that room saw it coming. A moment no one saw coming. The only sound in the room was the soft scratch of Barron Trump's chair on the highly polished floor. He was just over 6 feet tall, an imposing figure, but it wasn't merely his height that dominated the room. It was him. He exuded quiet confidence and unanticipated maturity, and every single eye in the ballroom was upon him. When he stood, his eyes swept the room, unflinchingly, purposefully, before coming to rest on the journalist at last. He didn't need to utter a single word. He didn't need to answer. His very demeanor spoke for itself. Even the gentle murmurs at the back of the hall came to an abrupt end when he stepped away from his table, and then, in step-by-step deliberation and unwavering posture, he stepped towards the stage. The reporter, once so charming, suddenly stiffened. His earlier confidence unraveled, crumbling under the strain of what was unfolding. The audience stood in abject silence, tension thick in the air. What was he going to say? What was he going to do? Nobody had any idea. But one thing was certain, this moment now belonged to Barron. And then, as he stood at the edge of the stage, he spoke. What did escape his lips, though, was something no one could have anticipated. A comment that left everyone aghast. Standing tall and composed, his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Thank you for your insight." The words were peaceful, thought out, and yet they contained a power that instantly left the reporter and the audience immediately shocked. There was no anger, no defensiveness, no glimmer of the fury that had been anticipated. Instead, there was a sickening atmosphere of control, much more than would have been expected at his age. Barron's eyes locked onto the reporters. "I've lived my entire life with people passing judgments on me, my family and my life," he continued, his voice firm. "It's kind of turned into a game to some, a way of filling in the blanks when they don't get the whole story." He paused, letting the words take root. "And I get it," he went on, his tone even. "We're public figures." The weight of the moment was undeniable. Barron wasn't there to lash out, he wasn't there to fight, he was there to take charge. A lesson in grace and power. It comes with the territory. Barron's steady but unbreakable voice resonated through the ballroom. The room was silent. Even the individuals who had been laughing at the last jokes were now motionless, their faces expressing a new fear. The teasing jabs had turned to something far more sinister, a moment of judgment no one had been ready for. But Barron wasn't done. "There's something important that somehow gets lost," he continued, his tone shifting, a low energy rising beneath his words. "Behind every headline, behind every joke, there's a human, someone with their own struggles, their own hopes, their own story." His piercing gaze never wavered from the reporter, who involuntarily clutched the podium's edge, his confidence crumbling. Barron's words hadn't been an attack. They had been a reflection of the seriousness behind the supposedly harmless joke. "You think you know me because of who my dad is," he said to her. "But you don't, not really." The reporter swallowed hard, the courage she'd started out with faltering under something else, nervousness. Barron maintained the silence for a moment before continuing. "What I've learned," he said, maintaining the pause just long enough for the sentence to sink in, "is that respect doesn't have to be earned. It must be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's story." A ripple of whispers coursed through the crowd. Some nodded, others simply gazed, as if seeing Barron Trump in a completely different way. But he wasn't finished. This was no longer about him. Words have power. Turning halfway around, Barron addressed not only the reporter, but everyone in the room. "We are at a time in our lives when it's easy to tear each other down," he said, his tone flat, but with a certain conviction. "Words have power to hurt or to heal. They have power to tear apart, or they have the power to unite." He let the comment hang, its weight palpable. "And I think we can all use a little of the latter." The crowd hung on his every word. This wasn't just some random reply, no outburst of reactionaries. Barron was accomplishing much, much more. He wasn't really reacting to an insult, for that matter, something more. He pulled back, his eyes returning to the reporter. "I hope this makes you think," he said kindly but firmly. There wasn't anything angry, there wasn't any bitter, there was only truth. And in that moment, he didn't just dominate the room, he reformed it. A quiet strength that left the room awestruck. A silence lingered in the ballroom. Barron Trump didn't need to savor the moment. He didn't need recognition or winning. Instead, with the same quiet dignity that had swept the room, he simply turned and sat back down. The soft squeak of his shoes on the waxed floor was the only sound in the silence that followed. No one moved. No one spoke. Not even the reporter, once so at ease on the stage, was still. The bravado, the rapid-fire wit, the smirk, all were absent. And then the applause began. It was only one tentative clap at first from somewhere near the front of the room, but it was infectious. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, the sound swelling into a deafening standing ovation. Some clapped in wonder, recognizing the value of the moment. Others clapped in relief, as though trying to salvage the tension that had taken over the room only moments before. On the podium, the reporter attempted a false smile, but it was clear the moment was no longer hers. It belonged to Barron. But seated once more, he said nothing. No smug smile, no self-congratulatory gaze, only a deliberate nod, proper and restrained. It wasn't humility, it was conviction, a silent confidence that he had uttered exactly the words that needed to be uttered. A moment that would resound far beyond that room. In a matter of hours, social media was ablaze. Guests had recorded the moment discreetly on their cell phones, and now the video was spreading like wildfire across the platforms. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Snapshots of Barron's calm response flooded each site, each one taking off at a frenetic speed. Reactions ranged from admiration of his composure to outright criticism of the reporter's own abysmal sense of humor. One of the tweets, which amassed millions of views within the space of mere hours, literally stated, "Barron Trump just schooled an entire room on class and respect." Another, from one of the high-profile celebrities attending the event, stated, "No matter what you think of his family, you have to respect that young man." And in a moment that had been fleeting, was now a moment of definition, not just for Barron Trump, but for everyone who witnessed it. This young man just gave us all something to think about. By the following day, the world was abuzz. Media sources reported on the story, headlines dissecting every detail of the moment that left a whole room agog. Some credited maturity to Barron Trump, stating it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for a young man who had spent a majority of his life in the spotlight. Others aimed their critique at the journalist's statement, deeming his method of talking to her unjust. Should public officials' children ever be fair game? The argument hadn't come to an end yet, an apology. But was it sufficient? The reporter, on the receiving end of the attack, issued the following statement the following day. "Comedy and commentary are wonderful weapons, but they must be employed responsibly. I crossed the line last night, and I apologized to Barron Trump for my remarks, but not everybody forgave the apology." The debate erupted on talk shows, podcasts, and social media. Some said Barron's speech was a compelling plea for civility in a polarized world. Others viewed it as a moving reminder that even public figures, no matter their surname, are human beings. Respect is not discretionary. While the high world were arguing, Barron Trump moved on. But for Barron Trump, the whirlwind of publicity appeared beside the point. He carried on with his day as if nothing had changed, with the same reserved gravity that had defined his response to the gala. His friends, however, assured him that he barely noticed the fuss, instead focusing on his work, his love, and his future. But while he adapted, the world did not. A moment that refused to fade. When the dust finally settled, the ripple of that night just kept going on. The news ultimately gave way to other headlines, but the instant would not be forgotten. It lingered in dinner conversations, classroom debates, and office chatter. It raised questions regarding respect, public opinion, and true power of words. Because this wasn't so much about a young man navigating an unforeseen circumstance, it was about what he reminded us all, that grace, dignity, and respect will always resonate louder than ridicule, and sometimes silence is more powerful than the loudest voice in the room. The power of words, a lesson from Barron Trump. Barron Trump's calm and thoughtful response struck a chord with millions. Amidst a culture of outrage and instant reactions, his choice to approach the moment with poise and wisdom felt like a refreshing anomaly. And it inspired people to think about, how many times do we step back before we react? How many times do we choose words that build instead of words that destroy? For the majority, this was a wake-up call. It reminded us how easily we dehumanize others, all for the sake of humor, politics, or entertainment. The journalist's remarks were a bitter reminder. Words do not only entertain, they also hurt. A moment that turned into a teachable lesson. Parents all over the nation used Barron's speech as a teachable moment for their children. Clips of his response were water cooler conversation in classrooms, prompting discussion of respect, empathy, being able to stand up for oneself without pulling others down. Teachers praised his dignity in the face of criticism, instructing students to think critically about how they talk. For if an 18-year-old in the spotlight could handle criticism with class and smarts, what's holding the rest of us back? A rare moment of unity. And maybe the most powerful impact of the night was in the way it bridged the gaps. For one shining moment, individuals of all political stripes and persuasions were brought together, not by a shared last name, not by party affiliation, but by admiration for a young man's character. It wasn't about his father anymore. It was about his. In a world where conflict often escalates into personal attacks, Barron Trump showed that dignity is a choice, and his behavior served as a reminder to everyone in that room and beyond that no matter how polarized things become, there is always strength in deciding to rise above. The takeaway: words can wound, but they can also heal. As the debates raged on, one sentiment rang out above all: words can destroy, but they can build too. And each of us has a choice about how we use them. In the end, Barron Trump's response didn't serve just his own dignity. It sparked something more, a moment of contemplation, a lesson in self-control, a reminder that respect, even when not earned, can be mighty. Let's keep the conversation going. Let Barron's lesson remind us all. Words hold power. Use them thoughtfully. Whether you're speaking with a friend, a stranger, or even someone you strongly disagree with, pick respect, pick empathy. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that challenge and inspire us to be better. Let's keep the conversation going.